I will be going through a watercolor painting based off of a photo by my friend Matthew Clemons. I believe this photo was taken in Texas. He shared it on the Facebook page Ron Ranson Disciples, where we all get together and paint generally in the style of Ron Ranson, a fast and loose painting style, utilizing a large hake brush and a relatively simplified palette. A lot of people there will start experimenting with different palettes, which is very cool. So we're seeing the application of the paints and whatnot, using the same techniques but with different color schemes, different color values and whatnot. So it's fun. It's a really awesome group. There's quite a few members on it that do tutorials and videos. There's Joe Menza, who's one of the admins. Matthew Clemons is an admin, but I don't think he does videos. There is Lois Davidson. She does great tutorials. Joe Menza, kind of, I think he's more like in the Bob Ross type vibe. Well, Lois is more in the English tradition of Roland Hilder. There's Posey Gaines. I'm not sure where Posey Gaines is located. He is a fantastic painter, and he has inspired some changes within my palette. Actually, I got some new paints in to experiment with. I'm not sure if I'm going to do them in this video or not, but I needed to get some new paints anyway. I was running kind of low. So anyway, so Matthew Clemons, like I said, is a admin on the Ron Ranson page, and he had shared this painting as essentially a challenge, free to use, see what people would have with the results. So with this one, I'm going to take a tonalist approach. I looked at the picture already. Unfortunately, it probably doesn't show too much through the screen, but when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking a nice, just smooth gradation in the background for the sky, going from a pink, just raw sienna, to either a cobalt or ultramarine blue. Then from there, the paper will all be wet. I'm going to put a dark for the verticals. I was laying in bed earlier thinking what I might want to do in regards to those darks. I might use the Indothrone blue and burnt umber for that. Then the closer foreground, I'm going to utilize raw sienna and try to get that to pop. I'm also going to probably splatter across the horizon, the foreground. I think that would bring some interest into it. I might take the razor blade, if I can find it. Everything kind of got shifted on this table around the other day. And I'm also thinking about the tree itself. I'm going to get rid of this wisp. I'm going to omit that. The moon is a little speck in the sky right there. I think yesterday was a full moon, and I think the photo was taken yesterday or 2 days ago. So I may just pull that out with a towel when we get to that spot with wet and wet. And yeah, I may also try to minimize drying times. The use of the hair dryer in this painting, but I may do a little bit of swiping on the sky, which will pull up some of the water there, and when I get to the tree, it'll allow for some wet and wet, lost and found edges, etc. So it'll give some variation and interest to that. So that's everything I had on my mind in regards to this painting. I think it's going to be a fun and interesting one. Unfortunately, I have not figured out the best setup to have a photo shown while I'm painting, so you can see both hand in hand. I also I have a smaller tripod that I'm using right now than my usual one, so it's kind of more zoomed in. You're going to see less of the mixing. Let me know what you think about that. Hopefully we don't get changes in focus, and we don't. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be wanting to refocus on my hand and whatnot, so that'll be good. All right, without further ado, let's wet our paper. When I had posted the last tutorial on some Facebook pages, people had asked what a hake brush was, and hake brush has its origins in Asia. I believe it's made with goat hair, and it's typically, I think it was originally utilized for a big just slopping on of paint. And I have an example of a more traditional one right here, and it's very just soft, fluffy, just slap on paint in the beginning just to kind of get things in there. But the hake brush that we use is made by this one says Cheap Joe's Art Stuff, but I believe Pro Art is the maker. Okay, so I think it's Pro Art. I'm not sure, maybe it was different variations on the same thing. The Ron Ranson Hake, Pro Art, Cheap Joe's. And this one is going to be a little bit more chiseled edge. It's going to have a finer point so than the traditional hake. And this is going to allow different textures and allows you to use the brush more throughout. And within painting traditions, I think a large mop brush within watercolor is very typical. So it's kind of utilized like that. Same thing with the large, you'll see a 1/2 inch or an inch square brush. I think this might be, yeah, an inch. Utilized within a lot of tutorials and videos. So it kind of replaces that. Like I said, you can get a variety of textures on it. And I believe the reason it wasn't originally started for that purpose when Ron Ranson utilized it. I think he was quoted in one of his books saying he just seen it in an art store in like an extra bin, and he bought it. And I think maybe he used gum arabic to put the edge to a chisel, or you could starch it and then ground it down a little bit. So he'd stiffen it and grind it down. We have members that had talked about trying those techniques, but I don't know if anybody was ever successful with taking a generic hake and creating that more pre-worn in feel on it. So that is the hake brush, and like I said, I don't think it was originally meant by Ron Ranson to be used in his style. It was just kind of a curiosity, and then it realized that he could minimize a lot of the extra tools. So I'm going to get my alizarin, crimson, and I always like to start off kind of establishing where I want my horizon line to be. It's going to be in this area. This hake brush I've been using over a year now, and there's points where I was using it every day or twice a day. They do last quite a while. I want to say maybe you could get it for, let's say, anywhere from 10 to 20 bucks. I haven't checked. I should. And that is just a really good price. But look for the Ron Ranson one if you're starting to look into this style. I'm going to mix in some raw Sienna. One of the things that I've been thinking about lately and looking for, whenever you paint, like whenever you're an artist, whenever you walk outside, whenever you go into your car, whenever you're going to class, any of those type of things, look outside at the sky and look for the gradations in it, look for how things interact. You'll notice a lot, and I'd seen this in an art book where they talked about Roy G. Biv, almost the rainbow happening in the gradation of the sky, where it goes from red, orange, yellow. There's kind of a greenish zone right here that may or may not take place. It's that transition from yellow to blue. And then as you get to the top of the sky, it's going to be that darker blue indigo direction. And I get to work early and leave late, so I often see that change in the sky taking place. So it's pretty cool. One thing I did notice though, and I took some pictures. I meant to post it on the Ron Ranson Facebook page that I was talking about, where I kind of stood, took a picture to the north, took a picture to the south at sunset and whatnot. And I looked for the gradations, and I saw it was in all directions, but I noticed to the east, the sun was setting in the west, right? That there was a darker blue on the horizon. Everywhere else had this, but as you looked further away from the sunset, you had a darker blue taking place, which was interesting. So look for those things and look for those changes. I darkened up the ultramarine with a little bit of burnt umber. Burnt umber has become a very important part of my palette. I'm going to put a little bit of the raw sienna wash down in that foreground, just to start getting things taking place. I want a higher concentration of the raw sienna towards the bottom of the page. The closer, it's going to help create a perspective. And then about here is where that dark line is. I'm just marking it out with the raw sienna. You don't have to do that. I don't usually do that. I was just, showing you guys with what I'm doing. I'm gonna mix the burnt umber with the Indithron blue. Usually for my distant backgrounds, I'll use a combination of ultramarine and light red, and that'll give me a purplish tone for aerial perspective. But here, that tree line is kind of close and kind of dark, and I think I want to keep it close and dark. Okay, so mix that up. I'm going to come across, and you can see everything is still super wet, so it's going to spread out. I mixed a higher concentration of pigment going into the wet and wet, because that will help prevent cauliflowers and the washbacks or runbacks or whatever. Now with horizon lines, one thing I try to keep in mind is I try to keep two things in mind. It settles on the concept of repetition and pattern, where I want to have a variety in the height of this, of the shapes and all that, not the same bump, 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 bump. We kind of want to have a more ba-bump, ba-dum, type thing. And I also want some variation in the color itself. So we can see the Indithron is coming through really good. Here's a little bit more of that burnt umber to get a little bit of variety, just feeding it in there. Back here you could also scrape. You can also lift a little bit. You could take the rigger and add textural ideas. I omitted my step of doing clouds, and I think that I might want to put 2 or 3 in. I could put them at this stage. I could put them with the rigger if I want. It's just a little bit of the dark that I had mixed up on the palette. A little bit of water mixed into it. This will probably dry super light, but they're not really prevalent in there. And I'm just trying to really treat my sky lately as my light source and having it my lightest value on the paper. I inadvertently have a white spot right there, so that might be a defect in the paper, which doesn't occur often, but that's potentially what that is. Or maybe that spot just didn't get wet. Or if you have oils on your fingers, if you're somebody that uses lotion on your hands, you want to be careful where you touch the paper, because that's going to create resist spots. If you're somebody with a beard and you have beard oil and all that, that's going to create resist spots. So I could try to fix that, but it might actually be an interesting spot for like the moon. The moon would visually be right here in the picture, maybe higher up, but that's kind of interesting. Let's see. Yeah, see, there's not much moving right there, so I think that will become where the moon is. So when you do that, you could take a towel when it's wet and lift it up. And you are going to have stuff pass over it, but like I said, I believe it's a defect or some sort of resist taking place, so I'll just try to darken that area in front of it. When I do use darks at this point, I concentrate less on the actual mixture that I'm using and just more trying to get a dark. But that's just my style right there, because I just threw some Payne's Gray on there to mix it with some other stuff. You can take the rigger and go into this background and add another textural effect. I think that's interesting. The wet and wet gives you that soft atmospheric start to it. Sometimes I find that if I do a dry off, I have too much of a differentiation between the wet and wet and then my more solid tones, at least the way I apply them. So I find that, and I mentioned at the beginning, that I'll moving increasingly towards just working with the paper as it gets drier and learn and experience those different steps. Let's put on some thick raw sienna, kind of mixed with our darks. One thing you want to do with painting, I guess there's kind of two schools of thought. When I took oil classes and drawing classes in college, I was like a genuine theme, a general theme that went around in the teachings, was that we kind of want to work the whole picture at once. Don't get caught up working up the detail in one spot. And that's kind of extra true with watercolors, especially when you're dealing with drying times and whatnot. You want to kind of get a unity and start working all over, because you are kind of working against the clock. And to talk about drying times, due to the saturation of the paper right now, the scratches are just going in dark, which is fine. Later on I might try to scratch out some lights. Now this would make a really interesting lake scene, I think. I might come back to this and screenshot this one scene just because of how it's looking. the Indothrone is just looking beautiful with how it dispersed and the reflection that it is giving if I had it at that. However, since I'm looking at this photo and I want to experiment with this, I'm going to darken up that area. Now, since it's receding, we're going to use our blues and browns and try to stay away from yellows and reds to see if we can get a recession. Now, I may be putting it in too dark, and a dark will cause, a dark will try to get it to push forward that spot. So there's two ways of handling that. I can put this dark in and then have a darker dark in the foreground, which is probably the way I'm going to go about doing it. Or I could probably add more raw sienna, more pure pigment to the foreground to make that stand out over the other. We're getting quite dry right here, so I think we should be able to get whites if we scraped, yeah. So if you wanted to scrape and get variety there, then I could get super dark. I think that was the way I said I was going to go about doing it. A lot of painting is decision making, and a lot of, I think people have a hard time with the fast and loose style because of the quick decisions you have to make. And I think people are worried about making the right or wrong decision. And the best piece of advice that I can give in regards to that is just do it. Like literally just, okay, here's a potential solution. Let me do it. Let me be in the moment. And then over time, you start getting it. You do run the risk of falling into the same pattern and painting the same thing over and over again and using the same technique over and over again, which probably be a good thing or a bad thing. So try to switch it up once in a while, but for right now, especially if you're just starting out and you're trying to get fast and loose, allow that spontaneity to happen. Just lifting up a little bit of this. We see it dried pretty quick in this painting, which I didn't think was going to happen. We had a storm come through last night, and my house felt kind of damp this morning, the air within it. So I really thought I was going to have a slower drying time taking place. Now, the tree itself is interesting, where it's a tree in winter, so it's kind of just barren and dead. So I'm taking the hake, making it a little wacky, to put a variety of textures in. And this is the wet and wet and lost and found edges and whatnot that I was talking about earlier with the tree, where some would disperse, where I did that little bit of wiping, but I did have a quick dry take place, so I'm not having too much of that. And then other spots are going to be more prevalent. Let's see, we do have the tree coming off over here. I'm going to let it kind of comfort that moon. Now, in my experience, this will dry lighter, most likely. We can see with the rigger, the wet and the dry areas. And I'm not going to try to do it exactly from the picture. I'm going to put my main ideas in. Use a little more water, let it kind of fade out. And then when it dries, I'll do another layer on top. So this is kind of, I guess my middle stage, my second to last stage, where I'm doing this to give a sense of depth to the tree and variety, as opposed to just having a blank silhouette. And that kind of talks about, that goes back into falling into a pattern of techniques that you want to follow in, like things that you wind up using. So eventually I'll wind up finding a different approach and start mixing things up, I think. Now, one thing we do is called counter change, where, and me and Matthew Clemons, the guy who posted this picture, had talked about this with a previous painting. It makes for very interesting value effects and whatnot, where if you're going over a dark area with another dark object, you instead want to lighten it up. So I'm going to put it dark right here, but then I'm going to scrape out right here. And then as you go over the darker area, the lighter area, you can push your object towards the darker side. This we see a lot with trees in landscape painting. We also see it with houses. If you look at it in nature, you'll see, if you look at a house, it might look darker near the bottom, but then if it's in front of a dark tree in the background, that tree is, the house is lightened up. So it's just, and it's also kind of a contrasty concept. So I said that I was going to scrape out over the darks to pull that forward over here. Now, I did scrape light over light, and I probably, in the spirit of counter change, you'd want to avoid that. But I'm going to come back over the upper portion of these trees anyway. This is the first time I'm washing the brush off. Now, I'm going to go to my Siennas and play with the foreground a little bit. I had wanted to do some splattering too, so let's do that and demonstrate that. With splattering, I take a round. I'll probably have to come back and splatter again because I'm going to put more in the foreground, but all you have to do is just take a brush saturated with water and paint and tap it from top on another one. You can tap it against your finger. People use toothbrush for this effect, where they'll get the paint on there and rub the end of the toothbrush. Mascara brush, I think you can put that on the paint on that and flick it as well. You can put it in the trees if you want to add some variation in there. Now, I was going to go back to the raw siennas and pop that forward. My main concern is that it becomes too expressionist at this point, which there's nothing wrong with. It's just not the direction I've been wanting to go in, but I wanted to demonstrate all the different stuff for y'all and just start getting a variety in these videos. So I'm just texturing up that foreground. Now I'm going to come back in over these trees and see if we had any more drying taking place. One way to check is the back of your hand. And I could just hit it with that blow dryer, which I'll probably do in a moment now. So you see we have variations in the tree where we have the parts that faded out and parts that are more clear. So let's see. Let's do a dry off and then maybe do something drastic. Okay. Looking at now, there's two things I want to do. As I was drying, I thought I really want some darks near the base of the trees, at least the base of the trees on the left. I want to see if we can get that. That's one thing I personally struggle with and have been researching, exploring, was darks in regards to watercolors, as we have things dry lighter and whatnot. I thought that would make for some interesting right here. But if that stays super dark, like I mentioned earlier, it could potentially push forward, I believe, if I'm not careful. So what I'm going to do is put a larger, darker object here. And this could just be the base of the clumps of that tall grass. And due to the size of this, it may help push that other one back. Then the other thing I was thinking about, and now this is super drastic, was since this tree that I had done was actually off screen, well, not really off, yeah, coming from off screen, off the paper, think I'll have a tree branch come up and over closer to us. So pretty drastic change, but the whole point of painting and learning is experimenting. So could even have another tree come up. And let this guy interact as well. It's that darker that I talked about in the foreground that would help pull that forward. And in this, we can lighten this up counterchange wise right here, and darker over that background. Yeah, let's do that. That may not have worked out great, but experiment. I find with closer trees, you can obviously overwork it. You can overwork whatever, but you can just have fun, put a lot of texture in, and just go random with it. Oh, willy-nilly. I'm just grabbing darks and just having fun throwing them on. I wonder how this is going to look under a mat along the side. So that's kind of a dangerous thing right there, having so much stuff close to that edge. But it one thing you can look at is compositional shapes, and this would, I think, start falling underneath like a L-shaped composition where foreground and going across. It might also have the aspects of the tunnel composition, especially if I brought something up on the other side. I deviated quite a bit from the composition from the photo by adding this in, but it's totally fine. So what I now want to do, this is pretty fun. I haven't done it in a video or a painting in a while. I'll take the razor, which is right here, and with the razor you could get scraping effects. You could take the end and start picking. But if you do this, you know, think of it like as the top of the little white flowers that might come up, the wild ones. Do a variety of dense areas and loose areas, but then also have different distances between the dense areas and loose areas. You know, and vary up and down, and that prevents the painting from being too stiff, and that gives a spontaneity to it. So hopefully we had a good line application variation there. We will have to do a dry off and take a look at the whole thing. So this tree is a little bit farther back than the picture. Obviously I'd put this extra tree in. I could put somebody walking in this area if I wanted to. And that would maybe tell the story of it being a path or something. Let's try it off and we'll think about it. I made it loud for a second. Alright, so before I started that dry off, we were saying we might put somebody in right there. If we did do it a little bit off center, right in this spot right here. Let's see if we can get dark with the rigger, indithrone blue, and burnt umber. Walking the dog. Now, you could add birds right here if you want. Okay, so did a lot of different things with this one picture. You know, we took a lot of artistic liberty. We played around with some counter change concepts. We talked about lifting, but it was already wet and wet. So if I wanted to lift the area, I can try to wet it and see if I can pull that area up. Or you can kind of scrub that area and pull that up as well. But you start getting affected by staining pigments, I believe. I don't usually lift that much. We got a little bit of change there. Let's see. I just want this one a little bit darker so they stand out. And you could always take pen and go over that if you have the micron pens. You could also use those for highlights and whatnot as well. Use the jelly roll. I think that's what I'll do. Could have also taken the razor to pull that up as well. I haven't used these on top of paint. I'll use these in a painting in a while. They're pretty fun. Whenever the painting's dry, it really does take the jelly rolls well, which are just jelly roll. I'm not sure who makes them. I think it's Pentel, but I don't know. The name's not on them. So there we go. Let's see what looks through there. Yeah, so that kind of popped it out a little bit. Probably could have just kept it in this region right here, the lightness. I think overall, we're at an experimental stage. Maybe we did enough experimenting. Let's leave the painting at that. I hope you enjoyed. Down below, there's a whole bunch of different links to my Facebook page. Check out, I have an Instagram, I think, linked there as well. I have a Patreon if you want to send anything my way. You know, support getting art supplies and whatnot. I think I also have a PayPal link down there if you'd like to send anything as well. Eventually, maybe this weekend, I'll try to set up an Etsy account. I think if I start shipping paintings again, it's been a while since I've shipped a painting. I'll now like try rolling them up and seeing how that affects it, and use the U.S. Postal Service flat rate tubes. So I'll roll it up, put it in the tube, see how that goes, and just do a set shipping price, and then post these online at sellable prices. So let's change our angle. I'm using a smaller tripod, so let's hope that I don't knock it over, so you guys can see what it looks like at the end. I'm going to have to physically hold it up like that. All right, I'm going to take a picture and I'll transpose it. I also see somebody in the chat, Alfatun Koala. Hello, how's it going? Sorry, whenever I'm filming, I'm using the camera, the phone, so it's filming down. Next time I'll have to open up a chat on actually the other device. I'll try to open that up and have it alongside me. All right, have a good day. Bye.